Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi Shmuel Pollen, and I'm here to tell you about my book, All In for God, which you can get at allinforgod.com. It's a very life-changing book. And today, in this episode, we're going to talk about sex, the truth about sex, as it is seen through the lens of the Kabbalists. If you don't know, my name is Shmuel Pollen. I'm a rabbi for about 20 years. I specialize in Jewish mysticism, also known as the Kabbalah. And I'll be the first to say that in my experience, I'm going to get a lot of comments which say, you're vanilla, you're old-fashioned, and how dare you tell me what to do in my bedroom. So what I really want to say to these people, that I'm going to say some things that are controversial. I might say some things that you're not going to like. But I want to say that there are a lot of problems with sex in this country and around the world, and we have to face them. I'm going to give you statistics on that, and then I'm going to offer you an alternative. That's all I want to do, is offer you an alternative. I don't claim to be an expert on sex, and I'm not forcing you to do anything. I can't force you through the computer to do anything. I can't tell you what to do in your bedroom, but I can claim to know the Kabbalah and just be the connection point between you and these genius sages who have been thinking about how to do sex for about 5,000 years. Well, hopefully they've been thinking about other things too, but this is a big one that they focused on. So I challenge you, just keep an open mind, and you might find at least one thing that you could take away from this show and implement. If nothing else, listen for the fun of it, because you'll get a little window into how we Hasidic Jews do things in the bedroom. And my colleagues would kill me for doing that, but people need help. They need help. So I'm going to help them. Let's get started. Forget Kabbalah for a second, and let's just talk about Jewish law and how it governs sexual relationships. And the bare minimum for sex in Jewish law is 1, it must take place within a marriage. You probably could have predicted that I would say that, even though it contradicts what's taught by most of your parents and teachers and professors. But I can't hide the truth. It's the right thing to do. And spending more time with your girlfriend doesn't make it statistically more likely to succeed in a marriage. If anything, it has the opposite effect. So if you love your girlfriend and she loves you, don't wait. Get hitched. It's the right thing to do. And the second criteria is pretty simple. The man must finish inside the woman, not outside. According to this, the letter of the law, you can do whatever you want in bed. But as in the last show, Kabbalah and the Hasidic Jews who follow it go beyond the letter of the law. Let's get one thing straight from the beginning. In Judaism, sex is not dirty or evil in any way. It's just a private topic to Hasidic Jews, as it should be. And speaking of privacy, here's an interesting fact that 99.9% of people don't know, and I'm including Orthodox Jews in that number. In the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, which was the holiest place in the world, there was a room called the Holy of Holies, which was so godly, only the high priest could go there, and even then, he could only enter once a year on Yom Kippur. When he went in, they tied a rope around his ankle because so many high priests died when they went into the Holy of Holies, because the holiness caused their soul just to take flight. They didn't want to be part of the physical world anymore. That area, the Holy of Holies, also had the 10 Commandments. Why am I telling you this? Because the rabbis of the Talmud say that there were murals on the wall of the Holy of Holies, and the paintings, according to the Talmud, were of angels embracing each other in the way husbands and wives do. The way husbands and wives do. Now, I don't think it's a big leap to understand what they mean by in a way that the husbands and wives do. These were clearly images of angels having sex. So for some reason, at the holiest moment of life itself, The high priest is supposed to be looking at and thinking about angel sex. So that's holy sex, but sex nonetheless. That's how precious sex is to God. It's in his innermost chamber, and it's very precious to him that it be done the right way, in a holy way. This is the opposite of priests in other religions who shun sex. The Jewish high priest must be married to qualify, and he must go home and be with his wife. And I think that means having sex with her to come down from the high experience. And most don't know that the sin of the tree of knowledge of good and evil is a sex story. The fruit that they were so attracted to was not an apple as you were taught. It was a cluster of grapes from which they made alcohol, and they were attracted to each other's bodies, so they made alcohol and got drunk and had sex. That can happen when you're not wearing any clothes. But that was the knowledge that the snake wanted them to have, to be naughty, to have naughty sex, drunk sex, and to do it in a totally secular way. No spirituality, divorced from God. God, for his part, never intended to keep sex from Adam and Eve. He just wanted them to wait until the Sabbath, because the Sabbath is a time of oneness with God. So there's clearly two different kinds of sex. There's God's way of having sex, the sex of one, the Sabbath kind of sex, the Kabbalah's kind of sex, and then there's the snake's way of having sex, the sex of two, which is naughty sex. So what is the sex of oneness? Let's talk about the most basic part of it, which is the positions. You can go through all of the Kama Sutra, and there's only one position that has the couple fully hugging and touching as much as possible. And the snake people, with their philosophy, have demeaningly called it the missionary position. It's not missionary, it's the position of oneness. That's the Kabbalah's position. And if a woman cannot orgasm in the missionary position, she should look into CAT, the coital alignment technique. So it is possible for anyone to have an orgasm in that position. Like we said, in Kabbalah, everything is about more unity. So you reveal less, not more. That means the lights are out. Light reveals your separateness, and we want to totally wash out the difference between these two people. When you have sex in Kabbalah, there can be no clothing separating you physically. There can be no strife emotionally. It's up to the man to assuage any strife. He speaks loving words that draw her heart to him, and you're under the covers. She lies on her back, totally still, totally surrendered, no pressure on her to achieve anything, no pressure on him to do anything special either. It's all about relieving pressure. The Sabbath, no competitiveness, no comparisons, no better or worse. You just disappear into the other person. You French kiss, so there is unity above as there is unity below. The focus of both parties is the unity between them. How much closer can I get to this person who is actually the opposite of me? How much can we disappear into each other? It could happen that the Hasidic couple has never seen each other's naked bodies. And that's a good thing, because any sight of one flaw could turn him off his spouse a little bit, but forever. And the Kabbalah wants to fully protect the couple from being turned off by anything. The Kabbalah wants to protect the spark. It gives the spark fanatic protection. If I tell you that this is the most pleasurable kind of sex, I have a basis to say so, because YouTuber Jordan Gray recently asked 13,000 women on his list what they crave most from sex. And the most common answer he got by far was connection, which is basically what I'm calling unity. I highly recommend you try this kind of Kabbalistic sex at least once in a while. It will be good for your relationship and your health. Now, what is the opposite of that? the sex of separateness, the sex of two. Now, here's what you're not going to like, because I'm going to now slam some really popular stuff in the world of sexuality, but I've got to bring the truth to you as I see it. The snake's whole idea is experimentation. If it looks good, try it. It's all about Cosmo's latest trick. An interesting thing about Cosmo is the snake in the Garden of Eden was an advice giver. Cosmo also gives advice. And it's basically the same advice, that you want to be as separate as possible. In the sex of two, here's the way it goes. This might be oversimplistic, but it's true on a certain level. You experiment and experiment in different kinds of separateness. Then that gets dull. So you need even sicker separateness. Then that gets dull. That all leads to the ultimate separateness, which is divorce. That's the goal of the snake, a really nasty, hateful divorce. That way, you're totally separate. And the kids are never again going to be together with their mother and father at the same time. So he's separated the kids as well. He only wants separateness. The snake smokes a cigar because he's accomplished exactly what he set out to accomplish. Remember, the snake is not your friend. He seems like a friend, but he seeks your destruction. And now I'm going to offend some more people. While in the sex of oneness, the woman is treated tenderly, gently, like a princess. In the snake sex, he starts you off with aggressive sex. That's where it begins. As you see in Hollywood movies, whenever there's steamy sex, they don't undress each other, they rip off each other's clothes. It's a violent ripping. Buttons go flying. Dresses are torn. The man throws the woman on the bed violently, or he pins her up against the wall. This seems like great sex experimentation, real passion. It seems exciting, and I don't blame you if you like having this kind of sex, because Freud said the ultimate pleasures for a human being are sex and aggression, and this is the fusion of sex and aggression. After all, this is what Hollywood has told you is sexy, and Hollywood is always right, so it must be sexy. But also realize what has happened. You are now in separateness 101. What you've actually done with this kind of sex is you've taken a loving couple and made them act like enemies. They're attracted to each other, they love each other, and now the snake steps in. And suddenly they're acting antagonistic towards each other and rough with each other. He is dominating her and calling her bad names like slut, etc. And all this is supposed to be very hot, but this kind of aggression makes sense on a football field between an offensive lineman and a defensive lineman, but does it make sense in the bedroom? Ask yourself that, because I think while you're getting off, the snake is laughing at you. He's fooled you. He's made you turned on by domination, but what really happened is separation. The care is gone. The tenderness is gone. The unity is gone. The soul is gone. And just think about this. The ripping, the pinning, the throwing down, the name calling. What does that remind you of? What kind of sex does that remind you of? Answer. It reminds you of rape. Rape has these features. It has the ripping, the pinning, the throwing down, and the name calling. Rape is sex done out of aggression. On a painful personal note, one time my ex-wife and I did domineering, rough sex. Yes, we tried it. I'll never regret anything more. I went further than she was ready to go. She cried. It became a big incident, and I believe it was a key reason for our divorce. I don't think we ever really recovered from it. So also keep in mind that if you're being rough, you run the risk of going further than your partner is ready to go, and the consequences could be disastrous, as it was in my case, a family of 7 broken to pieces. So if rough sex is all you know, I can't ask you to stop. But for the health of your relationship, try to scale back a little bit towards something a bit more loving. Scale back to something when you're not just trying to violently grab as much pleasure as you take from the other person like pleasure-obsessed animals, but rather adopt a little more a mode of giving to your spouse. Even though we can see how this separateness 101 is twisted, this becomes the new normal pretty fast. It becomes dull. So you either accept the dullness or you have to experiment with more separateness. You have to go to further extremes like putting your hand over her mouth, choking, slapping, etc. If you take it to its ultimate extreme, with many couples, you're going to wind up cuffing and whipping each other. And at that point, you can't get more separate from each other and from God. But it actually does get worse. When S&M burns out, you can wind up becoming more separate by cheating on each other, swinging, or having an open marriage, which is basically game over for your marriage. So experimentation seems like a good thing at first. But why is the experimentation always experimenting in ways that separate the couple instead of uniting them? That's my question. That's because it's the snake's form of experimentation. He is playing a mind game on us. When you have true intimacy, you don't need experimentation. You're happy right where you are. Freud well understood the animal soul, but he knew nothing about the godly soul, the soul of perfection, or what you might just call higher living, which finds it's abnormal to turn sex into something aggressive and finds it normal to have sex with elegance, romance, tenderness, while the woman is treated like a princess, modestly, caringly, and lovingly. I wish that one day S&M people will just wake up and say, what the hell are we doing? Why are we hurting each other if we love each other? How is hurting each other sexy? Why am I manhandling my princess? Why does my sex share features with rape? What is aggression doing in my bedroom? And how do I know my wife really likes this to the full extent that I'm doing it? The sex of one and the sex of two are diametrically opposed. While snake sex tries everything, the sex of one, Kabbalah sex, tries nothing and leaves everything to the imagination. And as you know, the imagination is the biggest erogenous zone. All that weird stuff is still on the table for the Hasidic couple, but they just hold their cards close to their chest. They don't go there, even though they know they could. It's sexier knowing you could than actually doing it until that bridge is burned. And then, as B.B. King says, the thrill is gone. Once you've tried it, it's never going to have the same excitement again. What happens is you've hit rock bottom. When S&M has lost its thrill, what happens when you've hit rock bottom? When S&M has lost its thrill, divorce is the next step. And it's the poor children who have to suffer never being with both parents at the same time, which is what a kid really needs. So we need this Kabbalistic perspective now more than ever. We need to start having the sex of unity. Look at the stats. 25% of married couples have an affair at some point. Pornhub's daily visits now exceed 100 million people per day. The most popular of videos being videos where the woman is being choked and liking it. 15 to 20% of men will have sex with a prostitute. 44% of people say they currently use a sex toy or have done so in the past. And you might say, what's wrong with the sex toy? Well, it is a problem when the sex toy is whips and chains, because that is abuse and a warning sign that the marriage is on the rocks. Why isn't normal sex enough for us anymore? Why do we have to cheat? Why do we have to go to prostitutes? Why do we need whips and chains? Why? Because we've totally bought into the snake's advice that separateness is sexy and It's all about the pleasure. These are the two big lies of the snake. Separateness is where it's at, and we have sex strictly for the pleasure we can get out of it. What do all of these statistics I mentioned above have in common? They separate the couple, every one of them. Snake's ultimate goal is a complete separation known as divorce. And the snake is winning in that regard, as he now has a 40 to 50% of couples divorcing and trashing each other in divorce court. The snake is shooting for 100%. And because we all have a little snake inside of us, Abuse with Whips and Chains becomes the fastest selling book in history. I watched the movie too. I had to see what my competition was up to. And I determined that that kind of extremist blend of sexuality and aggression is tempting. It gives you a dopamine rush. But is that really what you want from sex? A dopamine rush? Because a TED Talk explains that there is a proven psychological phenomenon. It's called neuroadaptation. And what happens is your dopamine sensors become dulled from all the stimulus. And that's why you have to go to sicker and sicker sex, more separate and more separate. And this particular TED Talk lecturer calls it the pleasure trap. And it eventually destroys your brain. Lab rats kill themselves when you give them a button for a dopamine rush like crack. And when a couple is addicted to sexual pleasure, they eventually have to go after other people's spouses, and divorce is then right around the corner, which will tear innocent children from both their parents. What you desire most when you have it actually causes the most pain. That's not who we really are. All that's coming from the dark side of the animalistic part of our soul. The godly soul strives to be pure and holy, and that has a spark that never burns out and never ever leads to adultery and the pain that that brings. Quite the opposite. The couple winds up more and more united than when they started. So remember, we got kicked out of paradise because of Cosmo's advice for listening to the snake, for separateness and pleasure. We all want to go back to paradise, right? To do that, we have to have sex on the Sabbath, not literally on Saturday. And the way to get there is not, but the Sabbath kind of sex. And the way to get there is not by having as much pleasure as possible. The sweetness of paradise isn't in the pleasure, but it's in the unity with God, the universe, and each other, which is pleasurable. But the pleasure is just a side effect of the unity. It's a peaceful pleasure. It's about the connection with your spouse, philosophically, psychologically, emotionally, and even physically. And the question is, how much closer together can we become until we're so close that I can't tell where you end and I begin, even though we're totally opposites? That's true sexiness, because to be truly sexy, you need to be a real man and a real woman who are yet united. I'm going to check on my camera and make sure I'm still in it. Looks okay. Looks okay. Now they want to put everyone on a spectrum between man and woman. So we're all a bit of both. That's not going to help people's sex lives. Men should embrace their masculinity and women embrace their femininity. That will lead to better sex. Notice how sex of oneness has a soul. There's a psychological connection due to the loving words they share before the act. The snake's kind of sex is just a couple of bodies going at it, no different from animals, no soul at all. In a TED Talk, a woman gave a talk about the clitoris, and it was a good talk, I will admit. But she had this art piece, which basically said, every pleasure a human can have, they should have. And Judaism and Kabbalah and pure logic doesn't agree with that. What about adultery? What about swinging? Should we have that? Being all about the pleasure is like eating only cookies for dinner. You've lost control. Your desires have overtaken you. You're possessed. I know this seems foreign to you. We're trained that when we hear sex, we hear pleasure. But why, when it comes to food, everyone says have restraint, and yet with sex, there's absolutely no thought of restraint? How we say, how dare you restrict me in this? Well, I'm not trying to restrict you. I'm trying to give you a healthy perspective, a more healthy diet, sex that stays fresh for life. Lack of restraint in food has diabetes and heart disease as a consequence, but there's no diabetes from bad sex. But then again, there are worse things like getting whipped and divorce, which traumatizes innocent kids. Remember Pinocchio? He got to go to Pleasure Island, which is every kid's dream. You can smash as many windows as you want and have as much candy as you want and smoke cigars and drink beer. But then you realize this place is being run by these black little demons. Then you realize that if you stay there long enough, you turn into an animal. Then Pleasure Island isn't so much fun anymore. It becomes pleasure hell. Walt Disney knew what the Kabbalah knew. He knew that the soul that seeks pleasure for its own sake is the animal soul within us. And that for the animal soul, everything is one step away from addiction and rock bottom. Everyone's trying to go to Pleasure Island, but I'm here to tell you it's being run by demons. I'm here to tell you the main point of the meal is to get nutrition, and the main point of sex is to grow the unity of the relationship. Man is right there between the animal kingdom and God. Humans can go up to being God or down to being an animal. And I will try to convince you now that Kabbalistic sex is even more pleasurable than animalistic sex if pleasure is what you're after. What makes Kabbalah sex different and superior? First, it protects the spark with all its might. It never lets anything snuff it out, even if that means extreme modesty, even if you never see each other's bodies. Second, the Kabbalah knows when to pull back. For Jews, it's 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. After a week of menstruation, we cannot be together. And then a week of checking for blood. There can't be one drop. Again, blood is a turnoff and it snuffs out the spark a little bit. During those 2 weeks, there's no touching, not even shaking hands, not even talking about sex, not even serving hot food to your husband. Jewish mysticism is so careful about intimacy, it doesn't want anything to disrupt it. So you have to be perfect about not being sexual for 2 whole weeks. It seems crazy, but it isn't. Because after the 2 weeks are up, the woman cleans herself totally, below her fingernails, gets any knots out of her hair, and the attendant checks for any stain or anything that may have stuck to her so she can be completely united with the water that she's about to dip in. She dipped into this beautiful ritual bath. Then the husband is just waiting at home in anticipation for when that door will open. And when it does, she's so pure and so sexy, it's like there's dynamite between them. It's better than all of your experimental sex. It's actually a scientifically proven way to keep the spark alive. As psychologist Douglas Weil said, putting any system under deprivation is a good way to recover sensitivity. Through deprivation, you can come back to finding vanilla sex, sex for unity, exciting again. All things being equal, if you don't do the deprivation and you just scale back to vanilla, you'll experience a letdown. But that's all things being equal. If you take my advice and totally change what you believe sex is for, unity, not pleasure, there will be no letdown. There will be a big uptick in this new kind of pleasure, the pleasure of connection. They've done the deprivation experiment with food, and they found that if you drink just water for an entire day, the next day, vegetables will become more delicious to you. Why don't they do the study on sexual deprivation? Because we all need to get back to what's normal. We need to find pleasure in more unified sex because that's the healthiest kind for our relationship. So we can spend some time connecting on purely verbal, philosophical, psychological, emotional, and moral grounds, and to align our belief in God or whatever it is you believe. That's why we try to marry within the same religion. We don't want the differences in religion to interfere with the total unity. Non-Jews might want to take a week off for deprivation's sake, or 2 weeks. It's just that you are not obligated in any of it the way that Jews are. Kabbalistic sex gets better every time as we know our partner a little more every time. You can always get closer. The snake sex for pleasure always becomes a little more boring each time. The thrill burns out just like fireworks turning into nothing once they pop. This pleasure trap is actually what's holding us back from everything we want in life. We know we should be up early, but we don't get up because sleep is pleasure. We know we should go to bed on time, but we don't because being awake at that time is pleasurable. So doing the opposite of what your pleasure tells you to do is called self-sacrifice, and that's actually the key to success in all these areas and in every area. Self-sacrifice is what will make you a Superman. We shouldn't be looking for new and exciting when it comes to sex. Those words don't belong. We shouldn't have a pleasure scale. We should be looking for more unity and to get to know each other even more. Sex is called knowledge in the Bible. Adam knew Eve. You're getting to know your spouse more. You're becoming closer every day. You reveal more and more about yourself. Then you have sex and you learn more about each other. And then you have sex again. But this time, you're more psychologically united than the time before. You need to introduce spirituality. You need to introduce the soul. You need to become one with her spirit. Then there's like a magnet between you that lasts your whole marriage. How do you get in touch with her spirit? First of all, be all there. Don't be thinking about anything else but her. Feel yourself in your body. Eyes are the window to the soul, so make eye contact that connects you and that connects you emotionally while you're having sex. In addition to that, think of a gratitude list of all the things you love about her. You need to really open up your heart for this. Think about how you're incomplete without her and your two halves lost to one whole and therefore desperate to get closer. Think of how much you want to protect this woman you love from any harm or aggression, how you want to treat her like a princess and focus and connect with her in a way that's so strong that it can only be called godly, all while she's the opposite of me. And since we're all cosmically connected, as you become more unified, it makes it easier for others to have sex that unifies too. Do everything to make you more unified. You're totally present. You can align your breath, breathe together. This is very powerful. Lock eyes with each other. The eyes really are the window to the soul. Groan together, moan together. Seems a little stupid, but in a TED talk, a woman recommended sort of a moan, like and you do it at the exact same time. That would be something that Kabbalah likes, getting into the same rhythm. Think of any way you could be more united, and you are doing what the Kabbalah wants. And if you believe in God, you're doing what God wants too. Unity is the key. Unity brings calm. Unity brings peace. With unity, you never feel dirty or worry about flaws. In the sex of unity, if a child walks in, it's okay. Think that's old-fashioned? I challenge you back. How great is the current popular sex? Whipping each other or reading about it and getting turned on. And then even the regular sex is wrong because ask yourself, in sex, is your spouse pleasuring you or is he pleasuring himself with your body parts? In other words, your meat. It makes no difference what your soul is like. It's purely a physical act. You could be the nastiest person on earth. He doesn't care at that point. He's consumed with his own pumping, his own selfish pleasure. In Kabbalah, it's the opposite. We're giving ourselves over to the other person. And I like to say, just as the kid will walk in on us one day, God will walk in on us one day. And some of us will be embarrassed, and some of us will be proud. I'm going to tell you a quote that you don't want to forget. It's from Geoffrey Chaucer, a poet. He says, "Familiarity breeds contempt." And that's so true. A group of teens once told one of my rabbis that we're going on a camping trip, and we're going with so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and some of them were girls. And my rabbi says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. You're going with girls on a camping trip? That's a problem." The kid says, "No, no, no. These girls are like sisters to us. They could even sleep in our sleeping bags and nothing would happen." So he says, "If they sleep in your sleeping bag and nothing happens, you don't need a rabbi, you need a shrink." Familiarity breeds contempt. They're too familiar, and now the thrill is gone. The Hasidic Jews take the opposite approach. Instead, we totally limit the interaction between the boys and the girls. They're separated at first grade, and then when they finally meet and get married 20 years later, it's mind-bogglingly powerful. I bet if we measured it, the best sex in the world is had by Hasidic men and women on their wedding night because they have never been with a woman. And to make it even more intense, you can't see each other for a week before the wedding. Once again, the Kabbalah knows when to step back. So when they have sex, it just explodes. To say, "I don't hide anything from my husband. He sees me when I'm going to the bathroom. He sees me with unshaven legs." That's great. But that is not a marriage that's going to last a long time because familiarity breeds contempt. To be a princess, and all of the princess's glory is within. Be modest a little. Take a week off. Distance makes the heart grow fonder. I'll give you something to shoot for, to strive for. Abraham said to Sarah when they were descending down to Egypt, he said, "Sarah, you're beautiful. We have to hide you, or they'll kill me to get to you." Did he not know that his wife was beautiful before that point? The answer is he was so pure, he only looked at her soul. He did not look at her meat. Then, when in Egypt, and he knew those were low characters, and they were going to look at her flesh, he had to worry about what would happen. Kind of the opposite of Tinder, where you swipe a million times only based on physical traits. I hope this was helpful. And I hope you have the sex of your lives.